Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is another of my kit review. As you know, I used to make a kit review mostly about the subjects that I like more than other models. This is a Tomcat in 1/48 scale made by Hasegawa, and the F-14 is absolutely one of my favorite plane ever used by Americans. This was also the plane involved, I think it was 1986, in a dogfight that ended with the shooting down of two Libyan planes over the Gulf of Sirte, and the opponent to this plane was the Sukhoi 22 Fighter. And of course, at the time, it was something that gave a big claim about what Americans did in the Mediterranean, because it was after so many years of in bracket peace. It seems ridiculous to talk about that today, when the world is so complicated. But it was the first fight where it was involving both plane with the swing wings, and because both the Fighter and the Tomcat had the swing wings. Of course, it ended good for the Tomcat, also because the Tomcat is a fighter, instead the Fighter, the Sukhoi 22, is a bomber, so it is, of course, something that cannot absolutely maneuver like a Tomcat could. But back in time, I was a kid in the 80s, and I like it so much to read about these histories about the US Navy using this plane. I think the squadron involved in that fight was the vf-1, the Black Aces, and the plane was slightly different from this one. I think it was still an F-14A, but with a different livery. The livery proposed here by Hasegawa, it is, in my opinion, the nicest ever that Tomcat used to dress. It was the vf-1 Wolfpack. The Wolfpack was the first squadron that was allowed to use the Tomcat. The Tomcat was already in service at the end of the Vietnam War, and they used the Tomcat mostly as a kind of raccoon plane for his mighty radar. The radar that he had in the radome was able to command the AGM-65 Phoenix missile mounted in different configuration. I remember back in time when the documentation started to be available on the market, the Tomcat can have a very different configuration between Sparrows, Sidewinders, Phoenix missile. There was all the combination. The most famous was the one featuring probably 4 AGM-65 under the plane, plus 2 Sidewinder on the pylon and 2 Sparrow on the pylon. That was probably the most famous configuration ever. I don't know if in reality they ever flown in that configuration, because surely the plane becomes much more heavy, so it's kind of rare to find just a picture about these planes, especially in the beginning when they are the first engines that were not so performing, like the last one that you can find, for example, reproduced in the F-14D Tomcat or in the B version. I think they used after this first version the motors coming from the F-16, so the plane became absolutely better. This was one of the lack of the machine at the time. It was just around the engines that were not performing like they could do on such mighty plane. And Hasegawa made this model in the 90s, and for the time this was a blast because it was a masterpiece model. Hasegawa is one of my favorite manufacturers ever, even more when they do subjects belonging to this era. The planes that I love is this one, the SR-71, the F-4 Phantom, the F-15, slightly the F-16, but the modern planes, sorry guys, I don't like them so much. The model indeed is absolutely well done. For the time it was a masterpiece of the Japanese production, and this was a blast when it arrived on the market, because back in time there was no Tamiya, there was nearly nothing, like an alternative to this one. I think there was just the Fujimi kit that, if I am not wrong, was sold like a 1/48 scale, but it was indeed in 1/50 scale. So, and the detail was absolutely not at the level of this Hasegawa model. The only real problem that you can have with this model, I already build up a couple of them in the past. One of them, it was made using the Verlinden production set to make all the avionics completely open, and I regret a little bit, because when you go for such type of details that was so common in the 90s, probably you go missing the proper pure line of the plane, because of course if you start to open the panel line around the cockpit and around the radome, all the parts that will show you the pure line, this line of this plane, Grumman made an amazing job on the Tomcat. The line is fantastic. You know, if you see a picture of the Tomcat in profile, it is still, in my opinion, the Top Gun plane, the nicest plane they ever had in the United States. You know, much better than F-23, F-22. They are modern, of course, they are better plane, but the beauty, the beauty of the plane, of the machine, was badly coming from the 70s. So you see that it was really, guys, you know, was something special. You know, I made that mistake because with Hasegawa opening all the side for the Vulcan Bay, for the avionics in the other side, you lose this part. You lose the final line of the plane. Plus, if you go for the option that they give you in this box to make the wing completely in opening position, they also add inside the instruction, if I am not wrong, this part, yeah, this part, that is the main front landing gear in the position to be placed into the rail for the deck of the supercarrier. You know, became a huge diorama, and you can have the position of the plane that became, of course, lower in the front, completely charged in the launch position. So you have also to display the model with closed canopy. They provide all this part in the kit, so they have closed canopy. You see also featuring the decal of the helmet of the pilot, and became a huge model, became a fantastic diorama. You know, you just have to add all the details of the diorama that comes around, you know, because the dimensions are pretty huge. I mean, the Tomcat Complete is a model, I don't know if they place the dimensions here. There you go. This is 40 centimeter plane, 40 per 40, so it's quite big plane, takes a lot of space, you know. And thinking back, because I made this type of models that I'm talking to you now, and I think anyway you lose the shape of the Tomcat. The nicest shape ever you can have in a Tomcat today, in my opinion, is this one, the classical one with closed wing. I think they also can feature Tamiya, for sure they do, but this I don't remember if they do, the parking position, you know, because the Tomcat was famous to have another extra position for the wings. This I don't remember if they do that. I don't really remember. That is a little over this type of angle to earn space more when they close the wing in this position. That is the typical parking position of the Tomcat, you know, that very often you can also find. And you also see that there is an extra line on the bulge of the wing with the line that it probably is the marking for the personnel working on these planes, to indicate that the plane is in the parked position, you know, not just the closed wing flying position. The model itself has, in my opinion, as I said, the nicest livery ever. You know, the vf-1 Wolfpack is, in my opinion, the nicest ever. But for me at the time was a little bit tricky and complicated because they had high visibility camouflage. So basically the plane was light gray for the upper surface and completely white for the under surface. You see the under part is completely white with a marking line where you still see the gray. The gray fades this way, is a kind of marked. It's a little bit tricky, was a little bit tricky to do. For me, this at the time, the radome was 10. There was, I remember also at the time, there was a lot of anthology about the proper color of the 10, the hemp color. You know, it was a kind of painting that it was so famous in the 90s. And as well as for the parts, you can see that here they made an excellent job. The only thing that you have really to pay attention when you go for building to this stuff is just that for the dimension of the mold here, you will have a problem if you go straight following the instruction. So maybe save this video if you can survive to my description, you know, but you will have problem if you simply go fixing like they say in the instruction for the cockpit and close this front to half fuselage, you know, these two parts, this and this, with the cockpit inside, because the mold have a slightly problem of fitting in this point. So when you go and glue this part up here and up there and you glue it to this point, you will be disappointed because there is a huge gap between these two parts of the fuselage and this. So my tip is simply even if you go for a super detailing all your canopy or your cockpit, sorry, there is a huge of extra details on the market. You know, I think you see they provide a part this way that is completely blank because they have a plastic part to place it over, or you can make it with a photo etched part with extra resin seat. You can place whatever you want. There is millions of details for such item on the market. You know, my best should be always to take a cockpit from IRS, then you go, you know, then you have already all the nice details already in position, even if, as you probably well know, the IRS parts in resin nearly never fit properly to the part they are supposed to substitute, so you have also there to make a dry fitting very, very closely. But when you get at the point and you are going to close the front fuselage, my tip is to do as I say. So you do the cockpit with all the details and whatever, then you place it inside the front half of the fuselage and you just glue in this point, you know, and let it dry. Just glue this side and you fit with the front radome. The front radome is that cone, the triangle cone, that is particularly because it is a round surface on the upper part and became flat starting from the under part. So you can fit this part, you know, so glue completely the radome and the front part of the front fuselage with the cockpit placed inside, but you don't go for gluing the rear part. So this part you don't glue for now. Why? Because when you place it on this position, then you can simply enlarge a little with a little sprue in plastic, so without gluing and then sanding that, then you will eat all this nice and finely negative detail that they did here. This will be completely eaten if you go for an ordinary for an ordinary glue with the part glued, you know, and this gluing point is quite huge. So if you go and you already glued this part, then you will have problem because it's not so easy to open it back. Even worse, in the instruction they say to do this part with the lower part. I just suggest to keep this part unglued and the lower part also unglued and just go for test fitting. So before you glue the two semi-fuselage in the front, then you go in the back, you take the shape on the upper side of the back of the plane here, so you have a perfect fitting fuselage up. Then you turn upside down the mold and then you go to work in this side, you know, because this part have to be fitted with that part. And here you have a little more room to work over the detail and so on, because even if you do a little mess here with the joining point, anyway, if you go for the version that is featuring the AGM-65 Phoenix missile, there is a big part that I think should be... I don't find it here, but there is, because I remember in the mounting, down there, it is that two rails down there. Under the beaver tail. The F-14A was famous because they had the beaver tail that was different from the ordinary Tomcat. You know, if you see, check at this part, this is the part that goes between the two fins, and then you can see exactly which is the difference between the following version of the Tomcat. This was specifically for the first version of the F-14A Tomcat used by the vf-1 Wolfpack. So this is the only issue that you can have with the assembly of this model. For the rest, can also be something not fitting properly. You know, you always have to remember that this is anyway a mold that is 40 years old. It was the top level for the time, but it is anyway kind of far away from the level that some company have. Because if I dare to say that if you go to Trumpeter models and to Hobby Boss models, so the fitting problem and mostly the shapes are not so correct every time. Instead, in this model, if you go properly for a clean fitting and for a clean assembly of the model, at the end you will have a very, very good shape reproduced in scale. So they are, in my opinion, still some of the best model ever. Inside this box, it is not just to protect the part of the model, but inside this box you will also find metal details for the central part of the wheels. There is several options depending from the version you are going to do, plus a photo etched set that gives you the detail to place it under the canopy. This is a huge box, you know, this is a really a huge model that they did. My opinion is simply fantastic. Every time that I have to manage a box like this is something really, really fantastic. As I said, they give you the photo etched details for this under part here, probably just with the hooks to finish the model in the opening position, so you can see that absolutely when the model is displayed in the parking position. And typical from the mold of this era, they also had a quite difficult to send it away mold line in the middle of the canopy, you know. But it's not so impossible because there is platoon of documentation and tips of people that is explaining you how to take it away, this line in the middle the of the canopy. It helps the fact that the Tomcat in reality had a kind of explosive line in the middle of the canopy that just arrived until here. So you can just go on to cancel this line, and cover the frame here, and keeping this line here, because the line is not mistaken, you know. Of course, it could be better if it is just produced with a photo etch set or a decal from inside, you know. But even if you have this line, it's not this big drama. These were the main issues of this type of kit. And that's it. So I was so lucky to find this amazing model for a bargain price. I'm nearly ashamed to say that I paid this stuff around $20, something like that. And $20 I think is absolutely a masterpiece to have in the again in the collection. You know, this was a model when I had the shop 10 years ago. It was something that I already used to sell for 60 bucks, not for 20 bucks. So in my opinion, is absolutely worth the money. And more than ever, is a fantastic plane featuring, in my opinion, which is the nicest American plane that ever flown. That's it, guys. Thanks for watching and see you in the next.